Hello and welcome to our next session on Maharishi Ayurveda from Maharishi International University. And this is a discussion of Dr. Tony Nader's first discovery under Maharishi's guidance of the Veda in human physiology. And it has to do with Rig Veda. And so we know there are 40 aspects of the Veda in Vedic literature. And the fundamental of all of that is Rig Veda, which is holistic, dynamic, silence quality of natural law. Total natural law in its most concentrated form. And even that is in 10 books or 10 mandalas. It's a huge work all about consciousness and how consciousness expresses itself in all of creation, mainly in terms of silence, dynamism, which is Prakriti. That's the first mandala, the first book of Rig Veda. And infinite silence, which is Purusha, the 10th mandala of Rig Veda. And then the 8 mandalas in between, 2 through 9, are the eightfold Prakriti that we're familiar with. Earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and ego. So the whole of natural law in those divisions, those 10 main divisions. And Maharishi was fond of having conferences with Nobel laureates and top modern scientists from many disciplines. And for a while in the 1980s, late 1980s, he was meeting with some physiologists and discussing the structure of Veda, the structure of natural law, the structure of consciousness, and how it might relate to the physiology, and particularly the Veda, the structure of the Veda. And the conference ended, and Maharishi, all the scientists went home except for Dr. Nader. And Maharishi turned to him and said, "The Veda is in the physiology. Go and find it." So Dr. Nader went to his room and couldn't sleep that night. He's saying, well, Veda and physiology. So what is Veda? Veda is the sounds or reverberations of consciousness, total natural law, in many different sequences of sounds. The verses of the Veda, Rig Veda in particular. And Maharishi had explained that the first expression of any branch of the Vedic literature, the first sound, has the totality of knowledge in that branch of Vedic literature. And the first syllable, and the first word, and the first richa or verse. And then each sequential unfoldment just elaborates on the previous. This is Maharishi's Apaurusheya Bhashya, the uncreated commentary. The Veda comments on itself. So he said, all right, we know Veda is sound, and the total Veda is contained in the first richa or verse of the first mandala, which is Prakriti or dynamism of Rig Veda, Agni Mile Purohitam, etc. So we know that from Maharishi. And then, well, Veda is sound, so in the physiology, how do we experience sound? And he got out his physiology, neurophysiology books and looking at the process of sound. And in that first richa, that first line of Rig Veda, that first verse of Rig Veda, there are 24 syllables in 3 padas. A pada means foot. 3 steps, we could say 3 phrases. 1, 2, 3. And those 3 phrases have to do with Rishi, the knower. Second pada is Devata, the process of knowing. And the third is Chandas, the object of knowledge and known. Knower, process of knowing and known. Fundamental structure of consciousness, of knowing, of knowledge, and Veda's knowledge. So he said, all right, but 24 syllables and 24 gaps. And each syllable has a specific meaning. The Vedic syllables are profound roots of knowledge, each with a set of meanings in themselves. And particularly the gaps in the Veda are as important as the sounds. Because we know from Maharishi's Apaurusheya Bhashya that the first syllable dissolves, collapses into infinite silence, pure abstraction, atyanta bhav, in which reside all possibilities. And within that, unmanifest, is all possibilities and total memory of what came before and therefore computing what comes after. So there's infinite dynamism within that silence of the gap. So 24 syllables, 24 gaps in this first verse of Rig Veda. Total knowledge expressed in 24 syllables. So all right, so let's look at how sound is processed by the human physiology. And that, he was working through that, thinking about that, going through, and he found that there was a correlation, direct correlation, which we'll go through, between the hearing of the sound strikes the eardrum, and then it reverberates the fluid inside the inner ear and the cochlea, and that excites the hair cells, which then turn that mechanical vibration into an action potential, chemical electrical signal that goes to the optic nerve, and then it goes to the primaries. We'll go through those steps. But he found that the first step of hearing is in exactly 8 steps, and each step has a synapse or some kind of gap, some change in the flow of information. So he got excited. It's 8, he found the 8. So he called Maharshi, it's 2:30 in the morning, and Maharshi says, please come. And he goes to Maharshi's room, and Maharshi's sitting there, and there's a camera rolling, and the lights are on. And somehow Maharshi knew that he would make the first discovery. And so he recorded that, and then Maharshi refined it, expanded on it, and for nearly a decade, Dr. Nader met with Maharshi frequently, often, to discuss the whole unfoldment of the Veda and Vedic literature, which is the book, Human Physiology, Expression of Veda and Vedic Literature, a 400-page book, which has total knowledge of Veda and its exact correlation, one by one, to each of the structures of the physiology. So that was the first discovery. And so the main point here is the relationship of the structure of the physiology with the structure of Rig Veda from the perspective of dynamism. That first mandala, Prakriti, is analyzed in terms of the 3 steps in the physiology. First, perceiving the sound. Second, interpreting processes, its meaning, understanding its meaning. And then third, then the reaction to the meaning, to the sound. Are we going to run from it? Are we going to go to it? Is it neutral? Is it important? And then what do we do about it? So, those 3 steps. So the first part of the process is the sound, the sensory stimulus, those reverberations moving through space and air. Hits our peripheral receptors, the ear, and particularly the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. Information is then coded and transmitted to specific areas in the brain where it's analyzed and brought to conscious awareness. So the first step is hearing the sound, and we'll show that in a moment. The second step is how the brain processes the information and interprets the sound. Do I like the sound? Do I not like the sound? Do I know the sound? And the third part involves our reaction to it. Again, do I go towards it? Do I go away from it? Is it neutral? Is it useful? So there's 3 steps. So each of the 3 steps corresponds to the sequential flow of sounds and gaps in the Rig Veda, as brought to light by His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in his Aparishaya Bhasha, uncreated commentary. Purusha means a human, and Aparusha in this case, and Aparishaya means not created by humans, but its natural law itself. So the brain's reception of the sound is transmitted from the periphery to the cortex in 8 steps, separated by synaptic gaps. And this brings the sound to awareness. And these 8 steps have the quality of rishi, of knowing. It corresponds to the first pada, or phrase, of the first mandala of Rig Veda. The second 8 steps are the interpretation and metabolism of the sound, giving it intellectual and emotional characteristics. As we said, is this significant? Is important? What is this? And what does it mean to me? This is the devata value, and there's a second pada, corresponding to the second pada of the first ritual of Rig Veda. And the third 8 steps involve generating a meaningful response to the sound. So this level, the response is if hides the sound and comes out with a response. So that's the chandas value. Chandas is the object of knowledge, or it has a hiding quality, hiding the rishi. That's the third pada. Together, these 24 steps constitutes one full elaboration of a sound: reception, processing, and response. Each of these 24 neurophysiologic, neuroanatomic steps ends in a gap from which the next step emerges. So they correspond to the 24 syllables of the first VIIIRk Veda. So here's the picture. And so the first step, number 1, is ak. Ak is infinity collapsing to a point. The first syllable of Rig Veda. A is unbounded infinity, mouth full open. Ka, mouth full, throat closed. So collapse of infinity to the point is the first elaboration of total knowledge. And that's the sound collapsing and reverberating the eardrum. And then it stimulates the fluids, the second step in the inner ear. Ak, ni. And then that reverberates the hair cells, mi. Then it goes to the optic nerve, le. And then it goes to another neuron in the medulla, in the brainstem. And then it goes, next step goes to the midbrain. There's another synapse. And then it goes to the primary somatosensory cortex in the insula, near the ears, inside where the brain kind of cortex folds in here. That's where the sound actually comes to conscious awareness. And so that's the 8 steps of hearing a sound. Exactly 8 steps. Correspond to the first pada. The processing and interpretation of the sound follows 8 steps within the brain, separated by gaps, which correspond to the second pada of Rig Veda, second phrase, which has a devata quality, the process of knowing. And so here we come to, because from the primary somatosensory cortex, then it goes to all these different structures in the brain. It comes to the entorhinal cortex and the limbic system, the emotional brain in here. And it comes to the thalamus, which is a central switchboard. The thalamus structure right in the center of the brain corresponds to intellect in the discovery of Vedic physiology. And it takes all the sensory information, all the senses, except for smell, goes to the thalamus, and then the thalamus distinguishes and decides where this information goes and sends it to the right part of the cortex. So then it goes through the emotional brain, and then it goes to the cerebral cortex, where we, again, think about it. There's association areas. What does this mean? I've had some experience like this before. What is it like? How do I understand this? And the emotional brain gives it emotional context. And then it goes to the cortex for preparation of action. And these 8 steps correspond to the second pada. And the third and final pada of 8 distinct steps separated by gaps produces the response to the sound. It therefore terminates the whole experience of the sound by covering it with a specific, meaningful, and adaptive behavioral, physiological, and neuroendocrine response. So behavioral, what do I do about it? Physiological, what happens in the physiology? Neuroendocrine is the nervous system and the hormonal system. Does it excite the nervous system and the hormones, or does it relax me? All those things. So that's the Chandasvag, the hiding or the object of knowledge. So these are the steps. So it goes from the motor cortex, the premotor cortex, motor cortex. So that sets up the plan, the association areas, the premotor cortex and motor cortex, they start the processing. And the prefrontal cortex also is analyzing and coming up. This makes the executive decisions. What do I do about this? It puts it all together. And then it goes back, the motor, so there's the planning going on, and also the basal ganglia are involved in refining the plan, and the cerebellum. And then it goes to the motor cortex for final command, and then it goes to neurons that go down through the spinal cord, and ultimately, and then another synapse, and then the motor neurons from the periphery to the specific muscles. To the eyes, I'm surprised, or to the tongue, I'm speaking, or to our hands, I'm gesticulating. So any of the muscles are motivated by going from the motor cortex through the spinal cord to the peripheral nerves. But then again, exactly 8 steps in this process. So now, planning the movement, we see here we have the prefrontal cortex, which is finalizing and processing the plan. And then it goes to the motor cortex and the somatosensory and supplementary motor cortexes. So those are somatosensory, it connects with the sensory cortex. And then these supplementary cortex, which plans, refines, thinks about what to do about this particular action. So the initiation or will to move involves the prefrontal area receiving proper motivational drive, again from the limbic system, the emotional brain. And then the motor cortex is primed to carry out the planned movement. And then the somatosensory cortex and supplementary motor cortex identify the target, initiate the speech or action, and give the final instructions. So these steps. And then 4, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum are both activated, and they time, coordinate, and refine a movement. Those deep structures in the brain, give it detail, give it time. Okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and this is the sequence and the refinement. I'm reaching for some object, and the cerebellum is processing, comparing intention with actual action, and refining it so you move your hand to the proper place and reach the target. And the thalamus gets the input from the basal ganglia and cerebellum and sends the impulses back to the motor cortex again. Thalamus, remember that central switchboard, the intellect value. And the last step, 6, 7, and 8, datamam. Layer 5, cortex cells. There's 6 layers in the cerebral cortex. Layer 5 is almost the deepest layer, sends the final impulses through a direct or indirect path to the motor neurons in the spinal cord. So here's the indirect path, goes back. So thalamus, motor cortex, and then back through the spinal cord, or a direct line, actually from the cortex to the motor neurons in the spinal cord. And premotor areas release the final plan of action and allow it to be expressed. Step 6. Step 7, the motor cortex, layer 5 cells, sends a final command to the motor neurons located in the spinal cord. And 8, motor neurons activate the muscles to perform a movement. So that's the whole sequence there, all 8 steps for the movement. So there you have it. Exactly 24 steps of hearing, processing, and reacting to a sound, corresponding precisely to these 24 syllables of the first Richa of Rig Veda. And that was the first discovery Dr. Nodi later made, leading to many others. And Maharishi considered it one of the greatest, if not the greatest discovery of the scientific age, deeply connecting the cutting edge of modern science, modern physiology, with the ancient Vedic knowledge, many, many, many millennia old. And they're both converging into the fact that this physiology is an expression of total natural law, expressed in Veda and Vedic literature. And so our unity chart, the processing of perceptual information on the surface level involves interaction of many areas of the brain. At a deeper level, number 2, there's a discrete sequence of 24 steps involved in the processing, interpretation, and reaction to information. And at the transcendental level, transcendental consciousness, pure consciousness, is the field of all possibilities. And 4, wholeness moving within itself. And unity consciousness, all the myriad of individual activities are perceived as expressions of one's own self, that unbounded ocean of consciousness in motion. Thank you. So our tip for this lesson is to listen to Maharishi Gandharva Veda or specific Vedic recitations in the Maharishi Veda app. And it's best to listen with full attention to get maximum benefits. And there are specific recitations for specific effects to help sleep, to settle the mind and body, to help enliven good fortune in various areas of life. All these you can search by effect in the Maharishi Veda app. So the URL is maharshivedaapp.com, and it's just $3.99 a month, I believe, and have it on your app, and you can play it anywhere you want, and it's very effective. So enjoy.